Hi, enjoy listening. A fine mist of rain settled over the industrial city, painting everything in dull shades of grey. It was Saturday morning, but the streets were deserted. Residents chose the comfort of warm homes rather than the gloom outside. Only one figure stood in the open. On the stone steps of Grace Baptist Church, a little girl in a faded green raincoat clutched a damp cardboard box at her feet. Inside were a few scattered coins, nothing more. Sophie Miller, just 9 years old, tried to stand tall, but the drizzle soaked her hair and chilled her fingers. At least the rain disguised the tears that sometimes spilled down her cheeks. She had slipped out early, before her mother awoke, leaving a bowl of oatmeal on the nightstand, with a plate over it to keep it warm. Laura Miller, once lively and full of laughter, now barely left her bed. Each day the illness hollowed her more. Prescriptions existed, pills that could buy Laura more time, maybe even restore her strength, but the cost was unbearable. So Sophie had taken it upon herself to beg quietly at the church. It was humiliating. Kids from school sometimes spotted her, and a group of boys had sneered that her family probably blew all their money on booze. She tried to ignore them, but the words lodged deep. Still, what choice did she have? This morning the coins hardly amounted to anything. Sophie bent to pick up the box, ready to go home. Then a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. A tall man stepped out. He didn't bother opening his umbrella, though raindrops peppered his jacket. Dr. Daniel Carter, 36, head of surgery at the city hospital, had passed this block countless times on his way to shifts. And every time he had noticed the same little girl in the same spot. Today, something in him said he couldn't keep driving by. In his hand, he carried a folded bill and a porcelain doll he had found discarded near his apartment's dumpsters earlier that morning. Its face was chipped, its dress torn at the hem, but somehow it seemed worth saving. When he picked it up, he thought of the quiet little beggar girl outside the church. Daniel approached carefully. "Hey there," he said softly. "Why are you standing out here? Saving up for a toy?" Sophie looked up at him. Her big eyes were earnest, her voice steady despite the ache behind it. "No, I need money for my mum's medicine. She's sick. She can't work anymore." Daniel froze. The drizzle muffled the street around them, leaving only the girl's words echoing in his mind. He could see immediately she wasn't lying. There was no act in those eyes, just desperation. He crouched down to meet her gaze. "What's your name?" "Sophie." "Well, Sophie," he said, pressing the bills into her palm. "Use this for your mum. And here," he handed her the porcelain doll, "something to keep you company." Sophie's eyes widened, her small fingers clutching the doll as if it were made of gold. For the first time in weeks, she smiled faintly. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, her voice trembling with hope, "You're a doctor, right? Will you make my mum better?" Daniel's throat tightened. He rose slowly and nodded. "Tell me where you live. I'll come by tonight." Without hesitation, Sophie gave him the address. She trusted him, maybe because he was the first stranger who treated her with kindness rather than pity. Clutching the doll, she hurried down the street, her raincoat flapping behind her. Daniel remained by the church steps a moment longer, the mist settling into his hair. He had patients waiting at the hospital, a full day ahead, but his thoughts clung only to one image, the little girl in the rain. And the mother she was fighting to save. The apartment was small, but spotless, every surface polished by a child's careful hands. Laura Miller lay propped against a stack of pillows, her thin fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. Morning light filtered weakly through the curtains, but it offered her no warmth. She knew Sophie had gone again. The oatmeal left at her bedside gave it away, the way her daughter always covered it with a plate so it wouldn't cool. A mother should have been making breakfast for her child, not the other way around. Shame bit at Laura, but her body no longer obeyed her the way it once did. She pushed herself upright slowly, fighting the dizziness that rose every time she tried to stand. The bathroom mirror offered no mercy, sunken cheeks, dark circles under her eyes. The vibrant woman she used to be, long brown hair, quick laugh, easy energy, was gone. What stared back was someone years older than 38, worn down not just by sickness, but by abandonment. Her husband's voice echoed in her memory, sharp and cold. "You're useless to me now, Laura. I didn't sign up for this." Greg Miller had been her high school sweetheart, the boy who once swore he'd never leave her side. She believed him until the diagnosis, until her hair began to thin and her body weakened. Then Greg vanished into the arms of another woman without so much as a backward glance. That night, Laura had begged him through tears. "What about Sophie? She needs her father." "She'll manage," he'd snapped, slamming the door. Since then, managing meant Sophie slipping out to the church in the rain, holding a cardboard box as though it could save them both. Laura's thoughts drifted bitterly to Monica Reed, their neighbour, a doctor, tall and striking, with perfectly styled blonde hair that seemed to shimmer no matter the weather. Monica had always been kind on the surface, smiles in the hallway, offers of help, but Laura had sensed something calculating in her eyes. It was Monica who first delivered the grim diagnosis to her, with a tone too calm, too measured. Laura hadn't questioned it then. Why would she doubt a physician? But sometimes, late at night, she remembered the almost imperceptible curve of Monica's lips as she spoke about the long road ahead. It was as if she wasn't just a messenger of bad news, but someone pleased by it. Laura shook the thought away. Suspicion was exhausting. She sank back onto the bed and pulled the blanket tight. If not for Sophie, she would have given up already. But Sophie needed her. Sophie deserved a childhood, not a burden. When the front door finally creaked open, Laura heard the quick footsteps of her daughter. Sophie burst in, raincoat dripping, cheeks flushed from the cold. She clutched something close to her chest. "Mum, look what I got," she said breathlessly, holding up a porcelain doll with a chipped face but bright painted eyes. In her other hand, she gripped a small wad of bills. Laura's heart lurched. "Sophie, where did you—" "A doctor gave it to me. He said he'll come by tonight to help you. His name's Daniel." Laura froze. For the first time in months, a flicker of something stirred in her chest. Not hope exactly, but a fragile spark close to it. A stranger was coming. A doctor. Someone who might finally see past the pills, past Monica's diagnoses, past the despair. For Sophie's sake, Laura whispered a silent prayer that this Daniel Carter wasn't just another person who would disappear. By the time Dr. Daniel Carter finished his shift, exhaustion pressed down on him like a weight. He had operated for hours, signed endless reports, and argued with administrators over budget cuts. Normally, he would have gone straight home to his quiet, empty apartment. But the image of the girl in the rain hadn't left him. So instead of driving past her neighborhood, he pulled into a narrow side street, lined with aging brick buildings. The miller's address matched a run-down complex on the corner, its windows fogged, paint peeling at the edges. Daniel climbed the stairs and knocked gently. The door opened almost at once, as though the girl had been waiting behind it. Sophie stood there with the porcelain doll tucked under one arm, her eyes brighter than in the morning. "You came," she said, a mix of relief and triumph. "Of course," Daniel replied, stepping inside. The apartment was small, but impeccably tidy. The kind of order kept not by an adult, but by a child determined to control what little she could. On the bed against the far wall sat Laura Miller. Her face was pale, her body thin beneath the blanket. But Daniel noticed the effort she had made to look presentable. Her hair, though sparse, had been carefully brushed. Her lips held a trace of colour, as if she refused to let illness take everything. "Mrs. Miller?" Daniel asked, moving closer. "Just Laura," she answered softly. Her voice carried both weariness and dignity. "You must be Dr. Carter. Sophie told me you helped her." "She helped me more," Daniel said gently. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" Laura nodded, and he began the familiar routine, asking about symptoms, history, medications. But almost immediately something struck him. The descriptions Laura gave didn't quite match the prescriptions she said she'd been taking. The side effects she mentioned was severe, yet oddly inconsistent. Daniel frowned. "Do you have your medical records here?" he asked. Laura shook her head. "No. Dr. Monica Reed, she lives down the hall, has been handling everything. She said the clinic keeps all the files." Daniel knew Monica by reputation. Ambitious, charismatic, too concerned with appearances. He remembered her from a medical conference a year ago. She had delivered a presentation with polished confidence, though her research had struck him as shallow. "Has she explained your condition thoroughly?" he asked carefully. Laura lowered her eyes. She said it was serious, that it would get worse no matter what. I trusted her." Sophie climbed onto the bed beside her mother, hugging the doll tightly. "But you'll help her, right?" Daniel felt the weight of the child's hope pressing against him. He didn't want to make promises too soon, but his instincts told him something was wrong, not just with Laura's health, but with the story around it. "I'll do everything I can," he said at last. "I'd like to run my own tests, independent ones. Would that be okay?" Laura blinked, startled. "Tests? Monica never said anything about more tests." "That's exactly why I'd like to do them," Daniel replied firmly. For the first time in months, Laura felt a crack in the wall of despair around her. Someone was questioning the narrative. Someone wasn't ready to give up. Sophie, sensing her mother's hesitation, slipped her small hand into Laura's. "Please, Mum, let him try." Laura looked from her daughter to the doctor and then nodded slowly. "All right. Do what you need to do." Daniel smiled faintly, though his mind was already racing. Something didn't add up here, and he intended to find out what. 2 days later, Dr. Daniel Carter stood in his office, surrounded by printouts and lab reports. He had arranged for Laura Miller's blood work to be analysed quietly, not through Monica Reed's clinic, but through his own hospital's trusted lab. The results made his stomach twist. Laura's panels showed no markers consistent with the diagnosis Monica had given her. None. Instead, the results pointed to a generally weakened immune system, likely worsened by the strong medications she'd been prescribed. In other words, Laura wasn't battling an incurable illness. She was being poisoned by the very drugs meant to treat her. Daniel leaned back in his chair, anger bubbling beneath his calm surface. How could any licensed physician make such a claim without evidence? Unless he forced himself to stay rational. Mistakes happened in medicine. That evening, he walked down the hallway of the Millers' building. His footsteps echoed as he passed their door and stopped at the one just beyond. A brass plate read, "Dr. Monica Reed." When she opened the door, Monica looked as polished as she had at the conference. Blonde hair in perfect waves, crisp blouse, and that cool smile she wore like armor. "Well, if it isn't Dr. Carter," she said smoothly. "I hear you've been paying house calls in my building." "I have." Daniel replied evenly. "Laura Miller." Her expression didn't flicker, but her eyes sharpened. "Ah, poor thing, such a hopeless case." Daniel held up the lab results. "Hopeless? That's odd, because according to every independent test I ran, she isn't terminally ill. She's been given medication she doesn't need, dangerous medication. You've been prescribing it, haven't you?" For a fraction of a second, Monica's mask slipped. Then she laughed lightly, as if he'd just told a joke. "Daniel, you know as well as I do that test results can be interpreted in many ways. Besides, patients often hear what they want to hear. Laura's always been dramatic." "Dramatic?" His voice hardened. "She's wasting away. Her 9-year-old daughter is begging for money outside a church to pay for those prescriptions. If this is a misunderstanding, then explain it to me right now." Monica crossed her arms, her smile thinning. "You don't understand the whole picture. Laura came to me desperate. She wanted answers, so I gave her what comfort I could. If she chooses to cling to my words, that's hardly malpractice." Daniel studied her carefully. There was something off. Not just defensiveness, but calculation. As if every sentence was a step in a rehearsed play. "Comfort doesn't come in the form of toxic drugs," he said, flatly. "I'll be requesting her full medical records from your clinic." Her eyes flashed. "Be careful, Daniel. Accusing a colleague without proof could cost you your position. You're not untouchable." "I'm not worried about me," he replied, turning toward the hallway. "I'm worried about Laura, and if you've been lying to her, I'll find out." As he walked away, Monica's door closed sharply behind him. Inside the Miller apartment, just down the hall, Sophie was pressing the porcelain doll to her chest, listening to her mother's shallow breaths. She didn't know what words had passed between the two doctors, but she knew one thing. For the first time, someone was fighting for them. The next week blurred into a cycle of tests, phone calls, and hushed conversations. Dr. Daniel Carter kept his promises. He brought in trusted colleagues, ordered scans, and had Laura's case reviewed by specialists outside Monica Reed's influence. Each time, the verdict was the same. Laura Miller wasn't dying from an incurable illness. She had been systematically weakened by medication she didn't need. But the why gnawed at Daniel like a splinter beneath his skin. What could Monica possibly gain from misleading her neighbor this way? One evening, while reviewing Laura's file in the hospital lounge, a name jumped out at him. Greg Miller, listed as Laura's emergency contact, yet missing from every follow-up note. Curious, Daniel called a colleague in another department who owed him a favor. Within hours, the truth surfaced. Greg hadn't disappeared quietly into another city. He lived less than 20 miles away, sharing a townhouse with none other than Dr. Monica Reed. Daniel's chest tightened. So that was it. Back at the apartment, Laura sat propped against her pillows, combing Sophie's damp hair after her shower. Her fingers trembled, but she forced a smile. "Did you thank Dr. Carter for bringing groceries?" she asked. Sophie nodded vigorously. "He even bought the cereal I like, the one with the marshmallows." Laura's smile softened. For the first time in months, her daughter looked like a child again, instead of a caretaker. A knock interrupted them. Daniel stepped inside, his expression serious. After greeting Sophie, he waited until she left for the kitchen before turning to Laura. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly. "Do you know if Greg is still in contact with Monica?" Laura stiffened. The question felt like a blade slipped under her ribs. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I have reason to believe they're close, more than colleagues." The blood drained from Laura's face. Memories rushed back. Greg's late nights, unexplained absences, the way Monica's voice had always carried a faint edge of familiarity when she mentioned him. "You mean?" Laura's voice cracked. "He left me for her?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded once. Laura turned away, gripping the blanket as if it could keep her from shattering. She had suspected betrayal, but not this. Not the woman who stood in her doorway with practiced sympathy, while secretly sharing a bed with her husband. All at once, her suffering made a cruel kind of sense. Monica hadn't been careless. She had been deliberate. Laura whispered, "She wanted me gone." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's exactly what I'm starting to believe." A sound from the kitchen broke the silence. Sophie humming to herself as she poured cereal. The innocence of it twisted Laura's heart. Her daughter didn't yet know the depth of the cruelty surrounding them. Laura wiped her eyes quickly. "I can't let Sophie find out. Not yet. She's been through enough." Daniel nodded, lowering his voice. "Then we'll handle this carefully. I'll build the case piece by piece. But Laura, you need to know what we're up against." For the first time, Laura met his gaze with something stronger than despair. There was anger now, sharp and dangerous. "If Monica wants me gone," she said bitterly, "then she underestimated me. I've survived this long for Sophie's sake. I'll survive long enough to expose her. The days that followed carried a quiet tension, like the air before a storm. Laura Miller moved carefully, conserving her limited strength, but her eyes no longer held the dull resignation Daniel had first seen. Instead, a fragile determination flickered there. Each time she tucked Sophie into bed, she thought of the truth hidden behind Monica Reed's polished smile, and her resolve hardened. Daniel visited often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with medical supplies, sometimes just to sit at the small kitchen table and map out a plan. He knew Monica would cover her tracks carefully, but every doctor left fingerprints, signatures, prescriptions, lab requisitions. If he could gather enough irregularities, the truth would reveal itself. One evening, he spread copies of Laura's medication history across the table. Sophie was colouring nearby, the porcelain doll propped against her cup of crayons. "See this?" Daniel pointed to one page. This prescription was written under Monica's license number, but the pharmacy never received the corresponding approval form. "That's a red flag." Laura leaned closer, squinting. "She's been slipping things through without proper documentation?" "Exactly. And here, this dosage," he tapped another page, "is far higher than any recommended guideline. It would explain why your body reacted the way it did." Laura exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. "So, all this time, I wasn't dying from an illness. I was being pushed toward it." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth sat heavy between them. Sophie looked up from her drawing. "Does that mean Mum's going to get better now?" Laura froze, tears pricking her eyes. Daniel gently placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "It means your mum has a real chance now. But we have to be careful. We can't let Dr. Reed know what we're doing yet." Sophie nodded solemnly, as if entrusted with a secret mission. Across the hall, Monica Reed poured herself a glass of wine. The apartment around her gleamed with modern furniture Greg had chosen, though lately he'd been absent more than present. That irritated her. She hadn't gone to all this trouble to have him brood about his sick wife. Ex-wife, soon enough, if Monica had her way. But it wasn't Greg's distance that worried her most. It was Daniel Carter. He had always been too principled, too thorough. And now he was snooping where he didn't belong. Monica had caught the way he looked at Laura, protective and intent. If she wasn't careful, all her work could unravel. She picked up her phone and dialed Greg. He didn't answer. Typical. She sent a terse message instead. "We need to talk. He's getting suspicious." For the first time in months, a chill crept under Monica's flawless exterior. She had played her hand boldly, but if Daniel kept digging, he might force the cards into the open. And Monica had never been one to lose. The doorbell rang late one evening, startling Laura Miller as she folded Sophie's pajamas. When she opened the door, her breath caught. Greg! He stood there, a shadow of the man she remembered. Shirt untucked, tie loosened, guilt etched into the lines of his face. His eyes flickered toward her thin frame before dropping to the floor. "Laura," he muttered, "we need to talk." Every muscle in her body screamed to slam the door. But Sophie's footsteps padded behind her, and Laura couldn't let her daughter see anger tear through her like wildfire. She stepped aside stiffly. Greg entered, fidgeting with his sleeves. You look worse." "I wonder why," Laura said coldly. "Maybe because I've been told I'm dying while raising our daughter alone. Meanwhile, you've been living comfortably with Monica." Greg flinched. "It's not like that." Laura laughed, sharp and bitter. "Oh? Then tell me, Greg, what is it like?" He swallowed hard. "I didn't plan it. Monica said you were beyond help. She told me not to watch you suffer, not to drag Sophie through it. She what?" Laura snapped. "Offered you an escape? A fresh start? You left me to rot, Greg. You abandoned your daughter. Don't pretend it was noble." Sophie appeared in the hallway, clutching her doll. Her eyes darted between them. "Daddy?" Greg froze, shame flooding his face. He crouched down, opening his arms. "Sophie, I've missed you so much." The little girl hesitated, then stepped into his embrace, burying her face in his shoulder. Laura looked away, tears burning. But she refused to let Greg see them fall. Later that night, in his office, Dr. Daniel Carter examined a thin folder, delivered by a colleague at the State Medical Board. Inside were copies of complaints filed quietly against Monica Reed over the past 3 years. Patients who felt overtreated, misdiagnosed, pressured into expensive prescriptions. Most cases had been dismissed for lack of evidence, but together they painted a damning pattern. Daniel tapped the folder thoughtfully. One more piece, just one undeniable proof, and Monica's carefully polished facade would crack wide open. He knew time was running short. Monica was already wary of him. If she realized how close he was to uncovering her, she might act rashly, against Laura, against Sophie, against anyone standing in her way. In Monica's sleek apartment, Greg sat stiffly on the couch as Monica poured another glass of wine. "You went to see her," Monica said. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't let her drag you back into that mess. You chose me. Us. Or are you regretting it already?" Greg shook his head quickly. "No, it's just... she doesn't deserve this." Monica set her glass down with a sharp click. "Deserve what? She was already fading. I only helped her face the truth." But even as she said it, a flicker of doubt crossed Greg's face. Monica leaned closer, her voice a velvet fret. "Don't forget, Greg, without me, you'd have nothing. No job, no home, no future. So choose carefully where your sympathies lie." Greg nodded numbly. But as he stared into his glass, Laura's hollowed face haunted him. And for the first time, he wondered if he had chained himself to the wrong woman. The storm broke on a Wednesday. Dr. Daniel Carter had spent sleepless nights combing through paperwork, chasing signatures, calling in favors from colleagues he trusted. At last, the missing piece landed on his desk. A pharmacy log showing that one of Monica Reed's prescriptions for Laura had been filled under a false patient ID. Fraud, clear, indisputable. He leaned back, exhaustion flooding him. With this, the medical board could open a formal investigation. Monica wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it, but the evidence was only as useful as the time he had left to act. Because if Monica suspected how close he was, she might do something desperate. At Laura's apartment, Greg showed up again, clutching a grocery bag like an awkward peace offering. Sophie greeted him with cautious warmth, dragging him to see her drawings. Laura, arms crossed, stayed guarded. "I don't want your groceries," she said coolly. "I want answers. Why did you let her do this to me?" Greg shifted, shame pulling her shoulders down. "I didn't know how far it had gone. Monica, she said you were sick beyond saving. She told me—" "She told you lies," Laura cut in. "And you believed them because it was easier than standing by me." Greg winced. His gaze dropped to Sophie, who was humming as she arranged her crayons. "I should have been here for her. For both of you." Laura's throat tightened, but she forced steel into her voice. "Then do something useful now. Help Daniel stop her." Greg looked at her, startled. "Daniel's investigating?" Laura nodded. "He has proof. Enough to bring her down. But she can't know." Greg hesitated, torn, still tangled in Monica's web, yet the sight of Sophie's trusting eyes was pulling him loose, thread by thread. Meanwhile, Monica Reed stood at her office window, phone pressed to her ear. Her contact at the pharmacy had just warned her. Daniel Carter was digging into her files. Hard, her pulse quickened. She had been careful, but perhaps not careful enough. She ended the call and poured herself a drink, her mind racing. If Daniel convinced Laura to testify, it would all collapse. Her career, her reputation, everything she had clawed her way toward. No, she wouldn't allow it. That evening, Monica appeared at Laura's door, her smile fixed, eyes sharp. "Laura," she said smoothly, "I heard Daniel's been spending a lot of time here. You know he has a reputation for overstepping boundaries. I'd hate for you to get hurt by his interference." Laura's stomach turned. She knew exactly what Monica was doing. Seeding doubt, trying to regain control. But for the first time, Laura didn't shrink under her gaze. She met Monica's smile with one of her own, cold and brittle. "You're right, Monica," she said softly. "Daniel has been here, and he's been very helpful." Something flickered in Monica's eyes. Just for a second, the mask cracked. Then she leaned closer, her whisper sharp as glass. "Be careful, Laura. Sometimes people who dig too deep don't like what they find." When the door shut behind her, Laura slumped against it, shaking. Sophie peeked from the hallway, her face pale. "Mum, why was Dr. Reed so angry?" Laura forced a steady breath. "Because she knows she's losing." But inside, dread coiled in her chest. Monica was dangerous now, cornered and desperate. And desperate people made reckless choices. But for the first time, Laura didn't shrink under her gaze. She met Monica's smile with one of her own, cold and brittle. "You're right, Monica," she said softly. "Daniel has been here, and he's been very helpful." Something flickered in Monica's eyes. Just for a second, the mask cracked. Then she leaned closer, her whisper sharp as glass. "Be careful, Laura. Sometimes people who dig too deep don't like what they find." When the door shut behind her, Laura slumped against it, shaking. Sophie peeked from the hallway, her face pale. "Mom, why was Dr. Reed so angry?" Laura forced a steady breath, because she knows she's losing. But inside, dread coiled in her chest. Monica was dangerous now, cornered and desperate. And desperate people made reckless choices. It began with silence. Laura Miller woke in the middle of the night to the sound of her apartment door clicking shut. Her heart jolted. Sophie was asleep beside her, her little arm draped across the doll. Laura slipped out of bed, padding into the hallway, only to freeze. Monica Reed stood in her kitchen, pale in the moonlight, a small vial glinting in her hand. "You should have stayed quiet," Monica whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "You were supposed to fade away. Instead, you let Daniel fill your head with nonsense. You're ruining everything." Laura's breath came shallow. "You are poisoning me." Monica's smile twisted. "Guiding you, making the inevitable easier. And Greg, he needed freedom. He belongs with me, not chained to a dying woman." At the mention of Greg, Laura's fear hardened into steel. She stepped forward, chin raised. "You don't get to decide who lives and who dies." Before Monica could reply, the door burst open. Daniel Carter, followed by Greg, stormed inside. "Step away from her, Monica," Daniel said firmly, his voice steady. Monica's eyes widened, then narrowed. "You don't understand. Everything I did was for us. For Greg, for the life he deserves." Greg stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "For me? You tried to kill the mother of my child. You made me abandon them. You poisoned the only good thing I ever had left." Monica's hand shook, the vial slipping from her grip and rolling across the floor. Daniel seized the moment, moving between her and Laura. "It's over," he said quietly. "I have the evidence. The board, the police, they'll hear everything. You won't hurt them again." Monica's mask cracked completely then. Her shoulders sagged, her expression crumpling into something small, bitter, defeated. Greg took a step toward Laura, but she stopped him with a raised hand. Her voice was calm, but unyielding. "You don't get to walk back in like nothing happened. Sophie deserves a father, yes, but not one who hides behind lies. If you want to be in her life, you'll have to earn it." Greg nodded, tears in his eyes. For once, he had no defense. Monica was led away in handcuffs before dawn. The scandal would rock the hospital, her career ending not in triumph, but disgrace. Weeks later, Laura sat at the park bench with Sophie, the autumn sun warming their faces. Sophie laughed as she pushed her doll on the swing, her voice clear and bright. Daniel sat beside Laura, his quiet presence a steady comfort. She wasn't fully well yet, but she was healing, truly healing now, not fading under a stranger's hand. "You saved me," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "You saved yourself, Laura. You just needed someone to remind you how strong you were." She smiled faintly, watching Sophie race across the grass. For the first time in months, the future no longer felt like a sentence. It felt like a promise. And though scars remained, of betrayal, of weakness, of loss, Laura knew she and Sophie were no longer victims of Monica Reed's game. They were survivors. And survivors rebuild. If you like the story, I would be very happy to have your support. Click the thumbs up. And to not miss new stories, subscribe and click on the bell. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And all the best.